So welcome to this Centre of Excellence Roundtable. For some of you who've maybe listened to previous roundtables, we've focused on for-profit organisations. And you may consider that non-profits either don't have the strategic reach or don't have necessarily the budget for running a Centre of Excellence. So we thought this time we'd have a Centre of Excellence Roundtable focused entirely on the non-profit sector. So we've got some fantastic panellists, Carmen Dowell from Salesforce.com, Tom Knox from valleyCAN Now, Tim Lockie from the consultancy NowITMatters. But before we meet the team or the panelists, I just want to level set this and just talk about what a Centre of Excellence is, so we all are talking from the same perspective. So we think about the Centre of Excellence under 13 pillars. And before you start saying, hang on, I haven't even got 13 people in the team, I can't possibly have a Centre of Excellence. This is about skills, not roles. This is about having things put in place to make sure your Salesforce implementation runs well and you get the results at the end. It's not necessarily about the people you have in place. So let's just run through those pillars. And there's a link there to a white paper that delves into these into a lot more detail, which you can go and download. So I just want to talk about them quickly. So first of all, vision. So what is the vision for Salesforce and for the implementation of Salesforce with respect to the entire business? What's the non-profit vision? The second is leadership. So have you got senior executives? Have you got your board of governors on board so that they can help you prioritize when you have different conflicts within the business or within the non-profit about which bit of functionality should be implemented first? The next is governance. What is that framework you have for making sure that those changes are being implemented in the correct way, that you actually are signing them off, that you have some change control over them? Which leads us to the point about change control, getting into the nitty-gritty about how we're tracking changes, how we're tracking different versions, how we're documenting those changes. The next point is methodology. Is it agile? Is it waterfall? What is your documented methodology, not just for development, but for the entire cycle from capturing feedback, capturing requirements, mapping business processes, creating user stories, understanding the impact of change on the org, doing development, testing, release, and then all importantly in terms of the training. So what's that methodology that you have in place? The next is standards. And people often think about coding standards, but there are actually many areas of the business that have standards. What are the standards for the way you capture feedback or you write requirements? What are your standards for mapping processes? What is the default standard for your user stories that are passed to development? What are your documentation standards? At what level is something considered complete in terms of documentation? What are your coding standards? What is your standard way of producing training material? The next area is metadata management. With Salesforce, the power obviously is that you can develop really quickly. Obviously, the downside is you can develop really quickly. Metadata management is so important because now with low-code and no-code applications like Salesforce, you need to manage that metadata just the same way as you manage code. And also bear in mind, Salesforce has metadata which we go and change in setup, but also now you're now changing configuration through records, through something like OmniScript in terms of some of the other industries. So there are different ways of managing metadata. It's not just at the inside setup, but actually it's at the record level as well. The next is architecture. Again, very difficult to design architecture in after the fact. You need to design it in upfront. When you're building a house, you need to know whether it's got 3 floors or 1, whether you need to put stairs in, where the wiring is going to go. That stuff is really hard to put in afterwards. So architecture needs to be designed up front. As the same as security. A lot easier to design security and then try and put a patchwork of security after the fact. Change management is not about the systems change management, but about people change management. How do we change the hearts and minds of the end users? How do we make sure that not just they know how to use the new system, but actually they know the new working practices, the new way that they need to work? And I think non-profits have a unique challenge, which is they don't just have employees, you have volunteers, you have donors, all of whom are actually an extended part of the company. And when you start changing the way systems work, you need to make sure that all of those people are included. PMO is your program management office or your project management office. how you are tracking the project, how you're tracking progress, earned value. Tooling. So what tools do you need that are not supplied by Salesforce that you need to implement? So what are you doing about backup? What are you doing about DevOps? What are you doing about capturing requirements, change intelligence, documenting your org? All of that tooling and the standards associated need to be in place. And the final thing is prototyping. With bigger organizations with multiple orgs, we're seeing that the Center of Excellence is responsible for pulling out best practice or maybe even prototyping particular areas of functionality to use as a demonstrator and then applying that to the different orgs. So as I said, there's the link to the white paper. The important thing about all of this is it's skills, not roles. So you don't need 13 people, but you certainly need to make sure you have the skills to put these things in place. Secondly, it's phased. If you're a small implementation, maybe you don't need all these in place from day one. And the next slides or two, I'm going to talk about that. And finally, these are solved problems. This is not something we're having to make up from first principles. I've been around Salesforce for 20 years, but around systems for about 30 years. And these principles were true for implementing SAP and Oracle. Clearly, the speed of implementation in Salesforce means that there are a set of unique challenges there, but these principles are true and are proven. So there's a high return on investment from implementing a Center of Excellence. 10K Advisors did a survey where they identified the top performing organizations, 91% of them had a Center of Excellence in place. So I said that it's phased. So you can see here the 13 pillars, and you can see whether you're a small implementation or large. The red dot is if you have to have it in place, white means it doesn't need to be in place. So even if you're a small implementation, you absolutely need to have leadership on board. They are critical to the success of every implementation. You need to have a handle on metadata management, because that's the core of the system. That's controls your technical debt. It controls the impact of any changes. As I said, architecture and security are very difficult to design in afterwards and need to be upfront. So you can see there the things which we think you need to have in place when you're a small, low-risk, non-strategic implementation. But as the implementation becomes more strategic, becomes more important to the organization, then you need to have all of these things in place. So you can build up to that. So that's fantastic. You probably don't want to hear me talk anymore. What's more important is you actually want to go and hear from the panel. As I said, we've assembled an amazing panel from the nonprofit world. First of all, Carmen Dowell. Carmen has had 6 years in Salesforce.org. She started as an account exec, so she's actually been there at the coalface talking to nonprofits, but she then joined her passion area, which is philanthropy, and she's built her career through to be Director of Technology Investments. So that means that she's focused on making sure that the grants that have been given out from Salesforce, we're getting the maximum value from those. We're exploiting Salesforce to the maximum. But she's also a board member at valleyCAN, Valley Clean Air Now, where Tom Knox is the executive director. So valleyCAN is reducing air emissions and car emissions in the San Joaquin Valley, which is the valley which has the greatest or the highest level of air pollution. It's the worst air quality in the whole of California. So doing some really important work there, actually helping people both from education but also hands-on activity to improve air emissions through cars. On to Tim Lockie. Tim is the founder. He set up NowITMatters 12 years ago, a consulting firm entirely focused on the Salesforce non-profit sector. Whilst other consultancies think about projects from a project success perspective and see that Salesforce's growth is a huge opportunity to make money, Tim's taken a more holistic perspective, and he's worried about his client success rather than project success. So that's required vision, it's required leadership, and required investment to play that long game in terms of supporting his non-profits. But I think you'll see as the discussion goes on how important that is. And finally, my name is Ian Gotts. I'm the CEO of Elements.cloud. We have an application which is a change intelligence platform. So all the things you do, managing everything before you start developing. So let's meet the panel and launch into some questions. So Tom, let's start with you. Can you talk about some of the principles of the Centre of Excellence and how they've been applied, but also how Tim's organization, NowITMatters, has helped you implement Salesforce better?
It's been very frustrating over the years. As Tim said, there's a lot of for-profit people who have tried to help valleyCAN and said, hey, here's how we do things. We can kind of dumb this down and you guys can use it. But it's two different models. So in taking these concepts and working really respectfully with a nonprofit that does have this vision of, we want to make the world this, here's what we want to execute, but there's a huge barrier there of, how do we have the resources and the momentum and the ability to achieve those goals. That's what their business model is, and how do you take the tools they have, give the power of technology to them, and get them over that barrier to be able to achieve that vision. And so that that's really what we've now gotten from both Salesforce.org and NowITMatters is really the support we need to take the power of technology, which can hurt or help. It can be destructive, it can be constructive, and how do we harness that to our needs in a way that's very human, that works for our team, who none of them really come from a technology background outside of our tech team, and our customers, who are normally really suffering from the side effects of technology. How do we translate all this to really achieve our vision? And that's really where our momentum has come, in the last year and in the last 5 or 6 years, as we have basically converted our whole business model into Salesforce.
Carmen, is that something you're seeing for every nonprofit, or how do we actually capture what we've just heard here, which is extremely inspiring, way more so than you're dealing with sort of a for-profit going, well, we want to drive more sales. There's so much more to that. How do we capture this and make sure other nonprofits get that level of understanding about what's possible?
I think the starting point for me, and where, excuse me, I've seen the organizations I've seen of all sizes that are successful with Salesforce recognize that Salesforce is a tool. It is not going to make or break your mission. It is a tool that can help you deliver on the work that you're doing. And I think when you have the right kind of framing of what technology, regardless, Salesforce is just one example. It doesn't matter what the technology is, but I've had organizations come to us and say, we need Salesforce, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And while I think we strive to be a company that partners with organizations and inspires the sector, at the end of the day, realistically, Salesforce is a tool, and you have to have business processes and leadership and an understanding of the relationship between the work that you're doing and the role that technology can play. And what I like actually about Centers of Excellence is that it is a methodology that can help frame the relationship between technology and a mission in, I think, an appropriate way when it's done well. And it doesn't matter what size organization you are, because those principles, when you're interacting with technology, even if you're just using it for a very simple like fundraising use case, or a very simple, just like literal contact management, I think making sure there is kind of a framework and an understanding of the role that technology can play, that's usually where I've seen success, for example, with valleyCAN and other organizations they're not huge. valleyCAN does not have a huge staff. As a board, we're often trying to encourage Tom to not be a one-man show. And I think having a Center of Excellence has helped frame the appropriate role of technology within the organization.
So is the term Centre of Excellence, do we need to change that for nonprofits, or do you think the terminology that I used at the beginning actually it will land and work in a nonprofit organization?
I can speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim. I was gonna say, I think so, but I'd love, I think Tim has a lot more experience on this than I do.
Yeah, we NowITMatters did a pivot in 2019 when we heard Brian Komar. Like I was at a partner summit. Brian Komar, who works at Salesforce.org and leads the impact team, put a slide up that said 90% of organizations collect data. Less than 5% use that data for all of their key decisions. And that, I looked around the room at my competitors who there's a, like, we're friendly with each other. It's a really great space to be in because we know each other well. And I looked around the room, I know the quality of work that I do and that the other organizations out there, the other SI partners do. And it was shocking to me that those of us who have been doing this for over a decade have created this amount of system-wide failure. Like that is, to me, that is failure on the core thing that me and my industry of consultants is supposed to be doing. And at that point, I was like, I'm not taking more money on this until we figure out what does it mean to actually start reversing that and seeing something go different. So I've been on a journey for the last 2.5 years now, trying to understand what are the keys to this. And one of the things that came up right away was governance and adoption. These are, like, if you see on an RFP, any kind of digital transformation, governance and adoption are going to be kind of the keywords on there. And they're just buzzwords. They don't really mean anything. And the more I dug into it, the more I heard that we don't have inputs. Adoption is an outcome, right? So, and governance is an outcome. These are things that happen when you do other inputs that create them. And so the more I got into, like, what are we even doing here? The more it became clear that we were being hired, hopefully, to create success for these organizations digitally. But the contracts were all related to milestones and deliverables. And our job was done when those were done, and the budget was always gone by the time those were done, leaving nothing to configure the humans. And the more I just looked at that, the more I just started dividing the world into, there is the human stack and there's the tech stack, and you've got to start configuring both. And in Tom's case, what's so interesting is that Tom did not need us to do any of the implementation work. We have not gone in and done any of their implementation at all. He's got an incredible developer and a very, very good internal DevOps team of like 1.5 FTEs that is just knocking out of the park, but there's almost no documentation. It has been well constructed. The architecture is really tight, but all the time has gone to that architecture. And so Tom's one of those great organizations where we've been able to come in and say, what you really need is the human stack, and we'll put in these pieces. And so, yeah, I think the Center of Excellence, to get back to your question, Center of Excellence is fine. I think that there needs to be a digital transformation methodology, which is what we've developed. And there needs to be services that are focused on creating that transformation. For us, that meant we needed to create a diagnostic, we needed to create a theory of change, and we needed to create a framework around that. And that framework needed to accomplish all of those 13 pillars kind of behind the scenes as inputs. And the inputs become like roles and RACI. So who does what? It becomes, it's just 4 things. Roles and RACI, it's a meeting cadence of weekly tacticals and a monthly strategic. That monthly strategic we call the Center of Excellence. So when we say that there's a Center of Excellence, for us, that's the monthly meeting where executives and key stakeholders are there to see what's going on. And I can speak to that a little bit more. It also needs to have a roadmap so that you know where you headed in the next 18 months. And it needs to have measurable KPIs on progress that's happening incrementally. If you do those 4 things, you can really start to accomplish almost all of those 13 things. I looked at that list and I think that there were 3 that I was like, I'm not sure that those really apply at the smallest organizations. The rest of those are really just built into it.
Yeah, so that's
really long-winded.
No, let's pick something that's really, Tom, from your perspective, to hire a consulting firm which is a Salesforce consulting firm, but not get them to do any Salesforce implementation, is fascinating. So can we just dig into that for a moment?
This all started a little over a year ago when Carmen introduced me to Tim. And we were explaining kind of what our tech development process was and where that was going. And at the same time, I was realizing our team had kind of reached our limit in being able to be productive, and that we were really being held back by kind of a lack of functionality in our team. That our team was doing amazing work, as individuals, each of them probably doing 2 or 3 jobs, but we really needed a systematic reorganization to get us on a track where everyone is being as productive as possible and really feeling proud about what they're doing, and that we can start to multiply our outcomes and our impacts. And so I spent a day filling our whiteboard with this giant, okay, if we could do this, this is going to be great. And then I stepped back and I said, there's no way we can do this. There's no way I can lead this process. And I emailed Tim that night and I said, okay, we need to bring you on board to manage this process. And it's funny because I looked over these notes yesterday and we're basically where I had envisioned, in terms of if we could just organize our team kind of within Salesforce better, where everyone is feeding our platform and we're getting the data back out of it and we're using the data to make decisions. We're automating all our processes more so that we're doing more work with less time. We're minimizing, kind of chaos or confusion as we're getting our work done. Just getting everything more systematic, which then improves everyone's lives. Our team is getting a lot more done with less stress. Was really the goal here, but I couldn't do that myself. Our team was too busy. So it was time to bring in people who were really expert with Salesforce implementation, knowing the language, knowing what's possible. And they've really been playing a coaching role in, okay, do X, Y, and Z. Here's a tip of how to do this. Here's how we build this piece of it. And we were expecting them to do more development, but we're incredibly fortunate that our developer, Vu, is incredibly talented and just needs to be told, hey, we need to do X. And he'll go away for 2 or 3 days and come back, hey, look, here, I did this. And so then NowITMatters says, great, here's how to build that in. So it's really more a coaching role. And the outcome of this has really convinced me that all nonprofits can really benefit from this approach, but having the talent in-house to do the development, and so that development is part of the business process at all times, and that everything, you're always thinking about how do we automate this? How do we make this more efficient? How do we make this part of our platform? And how many ways can we then connect it to everything else? That's really where the power comes in, that makes it worth putting this much time and effort into Salesforce development. And then that then has a multiplying effect in outcomes. And we are doing, 300% of the spending that we were doing 2 years ago. And we haven't added to our team. We have probably headcount of 5 less than we did when COVID started. And we're at about 3x of where we were when COVID started. So it's all due to automation and due to the kind of team orientation to making Salesforce work that NowITMatters has fostered.
I think there's an interesting point there where quite often the consultants are, in fact, luckily we've arrived, right? Okay, everyone, the consultants have arrived, you can all sit down now, we'll fix this, which is not partnership, it never is, but sounds like it's genuinely been a partnership, but it also requires a level of understanding and leadership in the client. I think sometimes clients aren't very good at hiring SIs because they actually don't really know what they want, and therefore the SI, it can't be a partnership if it's unequal. So I think the fact you've actually got good developer, and you've got a vision. So there's one of the questions that came in from the chat, which was, how did he find Boo? Where did he come from, or she? So I'm not even sure.
We were incredibly fortunate with Vu that he was an AmeriCorps fellow that had some experience, was already a certified developer, and he said, look, my goal is I want to make the world a better place with Salesforce. And so this sounds amazing. I'm basically going to drop out of my for-profit work, and I want to devote myself to using technology to make the world a better place. I don't know how you find that again. I mean, that should be common. It's not, but I would like to suggest that, you know, what a key skill to be teaching, that, you know, in terms of workforce development, you know, to create fantastic careers that really have a tangible outcome in all the problems the world has right now. You know, I think data management, data architecture, you know, is something that should be taught. You know, that there should be an active career development track to, you know, give the nonprofit world the tools they need, you know, in the form of really talented developers that are willing to trade, you know, great karma for, you know, the salary they could be making.
Well, shout out here for this, the Talent Alliance, which obviously Salesforce has launched, which is a number of organizations who are out there, Supermums, Revelant. There's a long list of organizations who are genuinely out there helping people get into the workplace and build those skills. Sorry, Carmen, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, so to your point, there's no shortage of workforce development organizations that Salesforce, you know, works with that are committed to the ecosystem. You named a number of them, but I think the kind of secret sauce for valleyCAN was finding that developer talent through AmeriCorps with Vu, who is, you know, Vu is very talented. But before we started working with NowITMatters, you know, there was like a little bit of mismatch of like, he had talent, but he also has a very particular way of working. And, you know, I think what was missing was the translation of Tom's vision and Vu's skills. There needed to be that bridge. There needed to be the middle piece there. And what NowITMatters really helped do was bridge the two. So helping take, I think, an overwhelming amount of like opportunity and vision that valleyCAN had. And, you know, I think when we started working with NowITMatters, there was a number of different kind of directions that we were considering as an organization, and helped understand, think through kind of the implications of those directions, but then also offer guidance to make sure that using Vu's time and skills, because he is one person, was being done so in the right direction and the right way. And so it still took, you know, a commitment from the organization, agreement from the board to, you know, spend money, what is really overhead money. You know, it's really just overhead spending, which is really hard to fund currently in the nonprofit ecosystem. And so, you know, that in and of itself is a risk to say, we're just going to spend money in an area that like we can't count towards a specific program. And that's always the hardest thing to do, but has paid off. As Tom said, you know, we're doing 3x more with 5 less headcount. And when you're an organization of, I don't even, Tom, how many staff do we have total? You know, that's like a significant 50 number of our staff. When 10% of your staff is not there, like that speaks a lot. But it takes, you know, I think it takes a little bit of risk to decide to do that.
So maybe when I think about that center of excellence chart with those 13 pillars, maybe we need a different spin on that, which is which areas also could end up with a consulting support or direction. So you can augment those. Some of those pillars you have to do in-house. Some of them you can augment and actually you need external support. And then looking at partnership.
I would say, so one of the things that I think NowITMatters has done really well, and I think Tom spoke to, was some of the like change management and documentation and that side of things. You know, I think this is actually particularly specific to small nonprofits, but while I don't think NowITMatters is doing this in place of valleyCAN, the level of documentation and kind of distribution of knowledge and thought process around our systems that's happened as a byproduct of the Center of Excellence and the work with NowITMatters has been huge. Because, you know, if Tom, we always joke, if Tom were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, which, you know, we obviously don't want to want to have happen, but, you know, I think even more so before we started working with NowITMatters and before we started, you know, going down the Salesforce pathway as an organization, there was a lot of risk to that as an organization. You know, there was a lot of ownership of that data. There was a lot of ownership of the processes. And, you know, it's still a work in progress, but some of that has been better documented and further distributed. And again, specifically in small nonprofits, that's such an important concept. You know, if it's just one person owning things, which happens all the time. Before I came to Salesforce, I actually worked at a small nonprofit, and I was the only person that knew how to use Salesforce. Like, you know, that's not a great model. And, you know, I think one of the things is by having this be more part of the organization as a whole, it has really made a big difference in kind of the security of the organization in general, like the intellectual property in many ways. And I'm not sure if I answered your question. I think to your point earlier is like all of this has to be a partnership. I think there's some things that a consulting partner can help guide, which is what has worked really well with us. And there are some things that organizations can take on their own. But if you have the opportunity to work with a partner like NowITMatters or have somebody help with these business processes, I think it's an ideal world. Whereas if I were sitting down and looking at that list and figuring out what could be done without the guidance of a consultant, I think, you know, there's some organizations that won't have the benefit of working with a consultant. And so at least using that as a framework is a great place to start. Not every organization has the opportunity to make the commitment of funds that we had at valleyCAN. And so doing something's better than doing nothing is what I would say.
I think if I can tag onto that, something that I think is really important to say is that NowITMatters is almost all we've done really is host conversations and create constructs in you know, around mindset. So we are not, NowITMatters is not making decisions. We're, you know, all we're doing is freeing up organizations that know themselves really well and creating some of the right paths and the right mindset for it to succeed. And one of those is we see complaining as a sign of hope. So one of the biggest issues for every organization is that they don't take complaining seriously. And, you know, to your point, Ian, about us, you know, walking and being partners, every consultant knows that in the organization, if you're going to gather requirements, somebody already knows every issue out there and has recommended it 15 times, and they're just being ignored right now. So the first thing a consultant should be doing is finding out who that person is. And if they're good consultants, they highlight that person and they tell everybody about it. If they're bad consultants, they like steal that person's work and don't give them credit. Like, that's consulting 101. We all know this as consultants. And so that's what's really important here, is to recognize that, you know, we just have not done enough work around saying, what is your specific complaint? Okay, on what page did it happen? Why is that a problem? And if you can get people to complain in less than 30 seconds from whatever page they're on, which is, by the way, just a global action away in Salesforce, so it's really, really easy. If you can start doing that, that's momentum. And once you have momentum, then you can start steering it. And so I think it's really important to note that the change that has happened at valleyCAN has been valleyCAN. All we've done is refed the right conversations and created a framework. But this is what organizations are capable of, and it doesn't matter what size they are. Like, organizations are incredibly adept, and nonprofits are really good at having conversations and getting at the root of things. That's like their whole thing. And so I just think it's important to say, like, we need services around that focus less on how to configure tech and more on how to configure the teams to do, to put it to work. And for that, you need a diagnostic, which is part of what NowITMatters has been developing, is a way to identify, okay, for Tom's organization, they had high tech capacity and low human stack capacity. Okay, that changes our entire strategy about how we would approach and what meetings we would have with them.
You said all we did was, and I think, again, you're understating it. Actually, prioritization and focus is probably the most important thing. And what you've done is you've put some focus on the things which make probably more of the difference, which is like understanding what the true requirement is. That has a massive impact on adoption. If we genuinely understand what we should be building, that will mean it gets used, and therefore that drives up adoption. That rarely, often that gets lost. We're the consultants, we know what you need, let's get on and build it. Or we're too busy to want to start building rather than find who's really got genuine issues. And the second one is documentation, which doesn't get you today, but it gets you 3 months from now, 6 months from now in terms of technical debt. And the last thing that always gets lost is any change management or training. Oh, that got put in phase 3, so we didn't get around to that, which again, massively hits adoption. So I think it's about that reprioritization of going, actually Salesforce is about delivering an outcome, not playing the technology. And I think that's where the people side comes in.
Well, and yeah, when I say all we did was, I think like this service that we've developed called Digital Guidance is like a Swiss clock. Like on our end, on my team's end, we've developed job descriptions tied to disk profiles. We have things charted out in a theory of change. Like there's a lot to it, but when you actually deliver it, like all things that are done well, it feels really simple. It's boiled down. And something you're talking about, Ian, is if you can get people to complain and say what's going wrong, then you can say like, hey, this is a great idea, and that we can fix in 20 minutes. Let's get that done next week, versus this other thing that is like, yeah, that's 4 objects in, and we're going to put this in the roadmap because we're already looking at developing, a build around that. And so those incremental changes are really, really crucial because they're small things that would make a huge difference. And the last thing to say is, most of the time people are in the right technology. I know that this is a really important point to make right now, especially as there's so much migration. Migrating off of some platform and onto another is incredibly expensive, especially in terms of the disruption that it causes. And you won't know for 18 months after that if Chris in accounting was so resentful about that Chris in accounting just went to spreadsheets as soon as they started the next, the new platform. And so I think it's really important to start with the platform that people are in, even if you're going to migrate. And that's been revolutionary for us as an organization to understand, wait, we want to start where people are at in the technology that they're at, build in some human capacity. And then if we need to migrate, all of that human capacity is migratable as well.
So if you can't find a NowITMatters or you can't afford it, what do you do?
I guess I've been talking to Tim a lot about this should not be optional. The work nonprofits do should be extremely important, and it should be really valuable to optimize those processes. It should be required to be as effective as possible. And I've said if there's foundation funding going into nonprofits, there really ought to be a requirement that they have a technology platform that is fit to their purpose and is maximizing their impact. If a nonprofit is not operating at that level, then they're not using their funding effectively, and that there's an automatic gain in the value of or the impact of that nonprofit. So this stuff should not be an optional spend. And I wish we had done this 5 years ago. We didn't have the funding. It took a lot of work and stress to get to this point. And I guess I'll say, what we've really gotten out of this is we saw documentation as kind of a luxury. We're moving so fast that, we put everything into just forward. We didn't have the time to document, and we'll take care of that next month. We've got this urgent problem right now. So it's certainly a lot of peace of mind now. I'm not saying everything's documented, but we're certainly much better documented. And then, there's the kind of facing forward of let's optimize things and finally fix some of these problems that are causing stress or, kind of inefficiency or complaints. And once you lay out a path to fix those problems, and, kind of tier everything, we've seen things like, wait, we don't have that problem anymore. That problem disappeared 3 months ago because we actually fixed it. And there's been some very significant progress in some fundamental business problems we're having that were a threat to our financial viability. So this stuff really does end up having a really tangible outcome. And this, it should not be optional, is kind of my bottom line. That impact is as important as profit. That the activity in the nonprofit world should be valued the same as the for-profit world, and the tools for the for-profit world don't quite work in the nonprofit, but we need to adapt them and help the nonprofit world to catch up. Certainly in a time right now where there are a lot of problems to solve in the world. We need a much more efficient, effective way of doing that.
But the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, 10% reduction in headcount and a 3x increase in output. I mean, every for-profit would kill for that.
But we're not making a profit, so it's like.
But that's not the job. But the point is, it's 3 times the output. You're not intent, as Tim said at the very beginning. That's not the outcome. Is not making a profit. But actually, if you could do 3 times as much with fewer resources using technology, that's what we've always been promised. I've been promised that for the last 50 years.
Well, but I think to Tom's point. Well, I was just going to say, I think to Tom's point that 3 times the output doesn't necessarily mean 3 times the funding. And, that's where it still continues to be, this is still, I think, the dynamic in nonprofit that's tricky is that, if your output increases, that doesn't necessarily mean your budget is increasing. Hopefully it does, but it doesn't always mean that. And so even though we're becoming a more efficient, higher producing, more impactful organization, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean the commitment of these resources to invest in this area is less significant. It just means that it's a good investment. And so I think that is, that's still a challenge for nonprofit organizations, is that, to be also honest, like I've never heard, regardless of size of organization, I have worked with, really, really small organizations, and I have worked with multi-million-dollar, hundreds of millions of dollars of organizations. And neither of them are like, I have a lot of operational funding. Like I have a lot of budget here that I can put into things like this. And so, I think that is something that has to shift in the social sector and the philanthropic sector in general. But I also, I also, to go back to your kind of original question here, is like, with the idea of like, what do you do if you don't have money to pay for NowITMatters? What if you don't have money? I still think you can adopt the principles that are behind the framework of a center of excellence, and that, while we shouldn't expect the outputs of a nonprofit to be the same as a for-profit, I do think that there can be an expectation that when organizations are making decisions, and whether it be technology or otherwise, make sure you have strong business principles behind it. Make sure that you have good, reasoning and have thought through your business plan. Even though fundraising is a piece of a business plan, there is other ways to think of a business plan. I also think there's a lot of material available on these types of concepts that even if they're directed to for-profits, can be adopted for nonprofits. Salesforce has a trailhead about developing a center of excellence. That's agnostic of what your organization does. And I think gleaning the pieces that make sense to your organization, that works as well. And I think so often I hear nonprofits say like, oh, it's not for me, it's not for the nonprofit sector, it's directed at the for-profit, or this is a business principle. Business and nonprofit are not opposites. It's just figuring out how to take what works in the sector and put them together. And then recognizing that technology, Salesforce, regardless, any technology is a byproduct of that.
So, sorry, the hour has flown by. Just a minute or two from each of you, just try and summarize where we've got to today. So maybe I'll start with you, Tim.
Yeah, I think two things. One, if you don't know where to start, reach out to NowITMatters. We are putting together a half-day analysis on where you're at, that sliding scale, so it's affordable for any size nonprofit. And it's not an ongoing thing. It is a, here's where you are right now, here's where you should focus. So like, not to pitch my own product, but I think that that's important to say, like, getting your grounding on what's next, I think is really critical. If that's too much of a lift, then I do think the place you start, if you don't know where the pillars are and all of that, make a list of what is getting in people's way and start fixing your data. Just make, like, if you know that your data is inaccurate, make 3 lists of pieces of data that are inaccurate, like, key donors that are missing phone numbers. Okay, there's 486 of those. Okay, great. This month, all you're trying to do is knock off 10% of those, 46 of them. And then the last thing is, executives need to pay attention to this, because the lack of accountability is actually the killer mode, the thing that kills us right now. And accountability is actually just attention. So if you as an executive give this any attention, you'll start to see your staff care about it. So I'd say that those are really important places to start.
Carmen?
Well, I guess really good data management is the key to success in nonprofits and actually producing impact. And a good system can multiply your impact, and that it's possible to use data management to change the world. We just need a better model of doing that. And that I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned that ought to be really used more widely, and that the nonprofit world should have the same amount of respect as the for-profit in terms of the importance to the global economy, the future of the world.
And I think, my closing thoughts are, and I've said it a few times, that, technology is a tool. If you're looking for a place to start with your business processes, and a center of excellence is a framework that can help guide that. But, no decision, no kind of no pivot in your organization is going to be successful until there's a firm kind of understanding and agreement on the business processes behind the decision that you're making.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for 3 of us for joining me. I've been watching the discussions in the chat where people are being, this is so much good stuff here. There will be a recording that's sent out to everyone who's attended. And again, thank you so much for 3 of you for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation. We could have carried on all day, but you've all got more important things to do in terms of fixing the air quality in the Valley, helping nonprofits and allocating funds to those nonprofits. So thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you on the next Centre of Excellence Roundtable.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Thank
Ian.
you.